Thank you for tuning in to another episode of One More Story. We are back and hoping to reach even more listeners in Season 2, so please, if you are enjoying the show, be sure to leave us a review and share with your friends. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's episode. My guest tonight is ALEX BERGER. He is a writer and producer, best known for his work on Blindspot, The Mentalist, and most recently, Quantum Leap. He is also a long-suffering Washington Commanders fan. ALEX, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This is part of my nightly bedtime routine with my son, so I'm glad to be on the inside now.
Well, I'm so glad to have you on. Did I hit your highlights? I mean, you've done a ton of TV writing.
You hit the highlights, and you also nailed the low light in the Commanders fandom. So I hope everything I've done in television is better than my taste in football teams.
Well, yeah. I mean, are they going to change the name to something better than the Commanders?
I think we're stuck with Commanders for a little while. I wouldn't invest too much in the clothing just yet.
Well, not living in the area. I mean, I haven't lived in the area since I was 10 years old. So it's just a completely different team. And I don't know. I stopped following them.
Yeah, I've tried to fall out of love, but you can't shake your first love. There was this, very attractive alternative option called the Rams, and I tried my best, but I couldn't get into them.
They're fun, though. I mean,
can't control where the heart goes. Heart wants what it wants, Pete.
You're a baseball fan as well, right?
I grew up a diehard Orioles fan, and then when the Nationals moved to DC, I was already out in LA, but I picked them up because my dad was a huge Nationals fan back in DC, and so it was something for us to bond over. And I got really into their run in the sort of 2010s. And they won the World Series, and I was thrilled, and I honestly do not follow them a lick right now. I'm way more I've become super into the Clippers because they're local and because I can't afford to be a Lakers fan financially. So that's been my passion as of late. But baseball's still out there, and if the Nationals pick it back up again, I'll for sure pick up the mantle again.
You should get back into baseball, and actually you should get back on the Orioles bandwagon because they are arguably the most exciting young team, and they had the best record in the AL East last year.
I would not be a good person to take stock advice from because I sold high on them, and now, I sold low on them, and now they're like a huge growth stock, and it's too late for me to get back on the bandwagon.
They're a lot of fun. I've still never been to Camden Yards.
No, it's awesome. It's a beautiful stadium.
Yeah, it's on the bucket list. So you're a TV writer, executive producer. Tell us a little bit about your path and what brought you to LA and kind of your track as a writer.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in DC, as we've discussed, and, sort of had a family who worked in and around the political space. And I was sort of headed that direction myself. I was on my high school debate team and my college debate team, and that's sort of like a feeder for lawyers and academics. But as a youngest kid, I kind of had to do something different. I had to rebel, and my form of that was to move out here with a couple of friends from high school. Although we ended up doing a show about debate as our very first show, appropriately called Master Debaters, because if we were going to be teased like that for our entire youth, we had to take advantage of it. And sort of, did a couple of odd jobs and sort of wound my way through the buffet line of Hollywood for the first couple of years, but landed eventually in the TV drama writing world, first as a writer's assistant and a showrunner's assistant, and kind of got a couple of freelance episodes, and then just got my break on a show. And I sort of worked my way up the ladder as a drama writer. I did one comedy that I created a long time ago called Glenn Martin DDS. That was an animated claymation show with Kevin Nealon and Catherine O'Hara, which was a lot of fun, but solidified my belief that I wanted to go back to the drama space. So that's what I've been doing. I've been on a lot of shows. I say my brand is shows your parents like. I do a lot of shows that are like cop shows, lawyer shows, spy shows. I really love to write, and I like to watch. I'm sort of a dinosaur in the sense that I really like watching broadcast procedural television. And most recently, like you said, I did a couple of years on this show called Blindspot, and then a couple of shows in between, and then I just finished a run on Quantum Leap.
So when you're writing these procedurals that are heavy into law enforcement. How much research is involved, and how much is it consulting outside experts?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's honestly what I pulled from those 8 years doing debate in high school and college is sort of a love of diving into a world and really immersing myself in it to the point where it's almost a second nature language. So if it's a cop show, like I worked on a cop show at New Orleans years ago that I was an assistant on at first and then eventually a writer on. And we went down to New Orleans for like a week and we rode around with cops and we talked to the politicians and we talked to the local residents and we sort of tried to figure out what it feels like to be here in this time and place as a police officer. So that when we were writing the show, it kind of felt like we at least had some verisimilitude. And then, if it's a spy show, I went to one of the spy shows I worked on, we went to the CIA and we talked to officers there and people who worked in the, journalism world covering that and people who worked in the political world covering that. You want to talk to as many people as you can and know what they're doing so that it feels a little bit closer to reality. I mean, certain shows that I've worked on are more heightened than others. I've worked on, a law show where we staged the high school prom in the courtroom. So it's not exactly like I was doing a documentary. And then I've worked on other shows that really did care a lot about like the procedure and the very specific, ways that it would really happen. But for me, I just want to know what's real. And then I want to make a conscious choice if I'm going to break from reality that I'm doing that. The first part of the process for me whenever I'm writing a pilot is much as possible to do research because I find that characters come from there, stories come from there, like all the made up stuff tends to come from the real. I wrote a DC White House pilot, which, I grew up in that world. So I thought, I know a lot about this, but I'll still like go to Washington and interview with people. And I filled up like 10 legal pads of notes with all these interviews. And all of the stories that I did came from tidbits that people said, from what it was like to work in the White House to, what it's like to go home at night to, all the little pieces in between. So I really enjoyed that part of the process.
Well, yeah. And it's so helpful as a writer, those details that you would never think of.
Mm-hmm.
And those specifics that make that world authentic.
Yeah. No, I mean, I remember like one of the, my favorite examples was this White House pilot that I wrote that actually never got shot. But I'd been to the White House a couple of times before, but I did not know that I guess there's a fly problem there. Like it's a very old building that is not particularly well ventilated or like well insulated. And so there's like perennially this fly problem, which somebody just threw away as kind of like, you're not going to be able to use this, but I ended up putting it in my pilot as a sort of small detail that became a bigger thing later. And it was, everybody commented of like, I can't believe that is a real thing. And it just kind of gave the show a little bit more realism, I thought.
So what are you working on right now? I know it's a weird time. We're post-strike and Quantum Leap is done, correct?
Correct. So we got canceled, which was a great run. It was a bunch of people that I'd worked with before who I really enjoyed working with and some new folks. And it was just super fun show to work on. I did a show for Netflix a couple of years ago called The Perfect Couple that's based on a book that ended up having a really phenomenal cast, Nicole Kidman and Liev Schreiber and Eve Hewson and a bunch of other really wonderful actors. And that's coming out in September. So I'm hopeful that turns out to be something people like. And, and then I've got a couple of pilots that I sort of out with. I have a pilot based on a book that I wrote that's now, trying to get out to market. It's everybody's kind of buying lottery tickets all day long in this town. And it's just a question of how many tickets you can buy. And if you happen to get the right lottery ticket on the right day.
Every article I'm reading is fairly bleak as far as the contraction of TV. I mean, that peak TV, that the big boom is over.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all knew it was a bubble even as it was happening. It's not like anybody said, oh yeah, there's 500 shows one year and 600 shows the next year. So just in 10 years, there's going to be 1,600 shows. Like everybody knew it was going to contract. And I think the writing was on the wall with the mega mergers of the studios and the way that the Netflix stock price crash in what I guess that was like 22. So I think predating the writers and actors strike, there was already a contraction. And the writers and actors strike definitely, I think, sped things along a little bit. So if we went from 600 shows to, let's say, 400 shows, it's still a lot of television out there. But there's that many more people who are out there in the supply of writers and directors and actors looking for jobs. Like that number of people is not changing. It's just the number of spots in the musical chairs game has shrunk. So I think,
right.
I think it'll level out. I think everybody right now is really cautious because they don't know exactly what the mandates are at the studios. They don't know, what the next 6 months look like. But I'm hopeful that it kind of evens out and opens up a little bit in the next 6 to 12 months.
And with Quantum Leap, how big was the writer's room on that one?
There was about 10 of us. I joined the show a little later. There was like a group of people at the beginning, and then they sort of shifted around the staff a little bit. And I came in the second wave of folks, so like halfway through the first season. And then it was a pretty steady group into season 2. And so there were about 10 of us. That was a strange show because we knew the writer's strike was coming. So what we ended up doing was we got renewed for season 2 while we were still shooting season 1 and just went right into shooting season 2 so that we could bank a bunch of episodes. So we ended up having 8 shot episodes of a new season to air in the fall, which was like one of the only shows that had new episodes to show, which was really good foresight on the folks who were making the show, I think. And just unfortunately never quite caught on to have like the big audience that keeps the show going now. But
and have you been showrunner on any of these?
No, I tend to be like the guy who runs the writer's room. So like, I've worked for the same showrunner for like 9 years in a row now. This guy called Martin Garrow, on and off. And so he ran Blindspot, and he was one of the co-showrunners of Quantum Leap. And I tend to be the person who's like leading the writer's room conversation when the showrunners are out of the room. And then when the showrunners are in the room, kind of catching them up on where we've been, getting yeses and nos to things, steering the conversation towards where we need to go in the future, getting some clarity about the direction, which is a job I love. I mean, I love being in the writer's room and kind of being with other smart, creative, passionate people.
Right. Would you want to be a showrunner?
Yeah, definitely. The Writers Guild has this program called the Showrunner Training Program that, is sort of an apprenticeship program for showrunners. And I did that, and it was incredibly edifying, and it was a really smart, talented group of people who all, have done great things since then. But one of the things that I realized is like coming up, having been on writing staffs for nearly 20 years now, like I've definitely had exposure to all of the pieces of the job that are involved in showrunning, but it's a little bit like watching someone swim for many years and knowing exactly the mechanics of how you swim, but then somebody's going to throw you into the ocean off a helicopter. Like all that learning is only going to be so valuable.
Right.
And everybody that I've ever talked to who was a first-time showrunner says the same thing, which is like, there's only so much you can have prepped in advance.
Well, and so for any of our listeners who don't know what a showrunner is, do you want to explain a little bit like the duties of a showrunner?
Well, so it's a funny thing because, writers came out here to wear sneakers and t-shirts and like never be in charge of anybody. And the reward for being the best at that is you get to be in charge of a, $100 million corporation. And you're essentially the CEO of this large business that has, 200 to 300 employees and, a massive budget and a ton on the line, which is not a skill that very many writers came to Hollywood with. So they all kind of learned it on the fly. Essentially, you're the, it's almost always, it varies, but it's usually the person who wrote the pilot episode of the show then becomes the showrunner or co-showrunner of the series when it's ordered to series. And they start by hiring a staff of writers and then a crew and go off to the races in terms of writing episodes and then making sure those episodes get produced and then doing the post-production on those episodes and then interfacing with everybody from all the way to the bottom where there's a PA who has a, HR question to the president of the network or the head of the advertising company that wants to talk to you about where the show is going. I mean, it's everybody in between. So you end up with a lot of hands and a lot of pots, and it requires a ton of delegation and trust in your staff because you can't do 100% of all the things that you want to do, but it's sort of the pinnacle of what you want when you're a writer. So,
but how much writing do you actually do when you're a showrunner?
It really depends on the showrunner. I mean, like someone like Shonda Rhimes or a Greg Berlanti, like who has multiple shows on the air, is not often putting pen to paper unless there's like maybe a big season finale or like there's a problem script that they need to deal with or a big celebrity actor that's coming on as a guest star. Even showrunners who are running one show, some of them will write, the season premiere and the mid-season finale and the season finale, and some of them won't write any scripts because they'd rather just be looking at the 30,000-foot view and having the foot soldiers write. But I mean, the other thing is so much of quote-unquote writing is not just typing words onto a page, right? Like coming up with really compelling characters and really compelling story is part of that process. Making sure that it is produced in a way that is, aligned with your vision is a huge part of writing. And then there's an enormous part of writing that's post-production, as you're, obviously dealing with right now, like putting together the sort of final rewrite, as they say, which is what a lot of people call post. can change the story radically and make an enormous difference. So even showrunners who like really miss the process of like actually writing, act one, scene one, still feel like they're getting their creative juices out some other way.
How does someone like Taylor Sheridan find time to do? I mean,
I don't know. I mean, Aaron Sorkin did it on The West Wing years ago. It's hard to do. I mean, Sheridan's doing even more than that. Yeah. And I don't know if he's just preternatural genius or he's using, more help than he claims he's using, or he has more time than he lets on. I honestly don't know. I'd love to know if he's like on that drug from the movie Limitless.
Yeah. Because also you have 3 kids. So how do you juggle, the work-life balance?
It's interesting. Before kids, I was traveling a fair amount for production. And in fact, early on in Blindspot, like I was in New York more than I was in LA because we only had so many people who could produce episodes. So I'd be gone for 3.5 weeks and then I'd come back for like 8 days and go back. And then that was when we had our second kid, and Martin, my boss on that show, like mercifully let me take a little bit of time off from going to New York so that I could run the writer's room here. And ever since then, I haven't done a ton of travel for work. I've done like here and there. And my wife, Susan, is like the most amazing mother in the world who doesn't really need me. In fact, I'm probably weighing down the ship. She can easily handle it all. But actually, in the last couple of years, I've only been in rooms that are over Zoom. Mm-hmm. So I am in my garage from 10 to 4 and can very easily hop out to pick my kid up at preschool or to meet the kids at the doctor or to go to the basketball game or whatever it is. And then even when I'm on just developing, which is right now, like it allows me even more flexibility where if I am smart about how I get my work done, I can make time later in the day. I mean, that was the nice thing about like when I was writing and in production, I had to learn how to, okay, I've got 20 minutes for this lighting setup. I can write one scene. Oh, I've got, 45 minutes in the scout van. I can write this one, act of the outline. And so I got really good at like discrete moments of work. And so I've had to try my best when I need to like channel that skill set, which is not something I always succeed at, but I try.
It's a tricky process. How do you wind yourself down at night?
We usually, we don't have the best sleep hygiene in the world. We get our kids down some, we have 3. We get our younger boys down sometime between 7 and 7:30, which is a long process that we usually divide and conquer on. And then my daughter stays up for like another hour, and sometimes we're, getting work done, and sometimes we're playing with her. She's down by 8:30 to 9, and we're up really early. We're, Susan's up at 4:30 and I'm up at 5. So like we're usually fading by that point. And then what'll usually happen is like we'll both be sitting on our laptops watching a show and returning emails from the day. One of us tends to conk out before the other on the couch, and then we drag the other one to bed between like, I would say 10 and 11. And then, if we have a dinner or whatever, then it's obviously everything changes. But yeah, I wish that I turned off my brain and screens a little bit more between that and bedtime. But I just tend to like roll right into sleep with a little bit of bedtime TikTok, which is even worse.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I feel like I'm in confession right now.
No, it's funny. You're not the first guest I've had who has rather sheepishly admitted to falling asleep with phone in hand scrolling TikTok.
Yeah, I mean, I charge it. I'm good. It gets on the charger, but it's often 15 seconds later that I'm asleep. But then I'm going to take this as this is going to be my come to Jesus moment, which is fun for a Jew. And I'm gonna try to get like maybe like a 15-minute no screens buffer for like we'll call it a week, and I'll report back.
It's hard. I mean, it is. So when do you find time to watch things and to read things? Because that's what I feel that gets lost.
It depends if it's important or not. So like reading, I almost exclusively do on audiobook, which is frustrating when there is no audiobook and I need to read it because I truly have a very hard time like sitting and reading physical books now. But I listen to audiobooks at like 2 to 3x speed, so I can like jam through those pretty fast. And then watching, if it's something that I need to watch for work, I try to do it during the day when I can focus and like take notes. If it's like unwinding or like something that I want to be vaguely aware of, I'll watch at night. I can't usually multitask. I can't like return email and watch something that I'm following the story. So if I need to return email or do something on the computer, I tend to put on something I've seen before. Like I do a lot of like 90s action movies.
Nice. Well, like what?
Like we went through like a James Cameron phase. We went to then we would go through actor phases. We went through like a Harrison Ford phase. I think we just watched Twister, which is like a very random one. I think I put on, what did I put on last night? That was a classic, like, the Firm and A Few Good Men and like, just stuff that you can tune out for a second and tune back in and know exactly where you are. It's like listening to a record that you've listened to before. Like it's soothing, but it's still entertaining.
And also this podcast is part of your children's bedtime routine as well, right?
Jacob, my middle son, I do his bedtime when my wife does my youngest son, Jamesy. And we read a little bit. And then we used to do a meditation, but he kind of got bored of those and wanted to do stories. And it was when I was just discovering your podcast. So we skip ahead. We do one story from the podcast. And we've gone through every episode twice, and he is not a person who wants to listen to the same thing twice. So we've moved on to some other ones that are not as good. So I'm trying my best to contribute to the replenishment of your supply.
Well, are you ready to dive in and contribute to this canon of stories for your children?
I hope I live up to it.
Do it for the kids, Alex.
I'm doing it for the kids. I hope I live up to the hype.
Oh, you will. The word is portal. Once upon a time, there was a young boy named Jarvis. And Jarvis was a very, very curious child. He was kind of a loner. He didn't have a ton of friends. He spent a lot of time in his room reading and drawing and building things with Legos. He even got into paper mache for a bit, which was quite messy. His parents weren't super happy about that because it involves pulpy, wet, sticky paper. And he was just curious. He would build all sorts of things, and he would develop these narratives in his head and act out these magical worlds based on the things he would build. So, for instance, when he built a giant glacier out of paper mache, he imagined an entire world full of penguins marching in lockstep across the glacier and then diving into the frigid waters below. And he would use little things around the house. He had some conventional toys, but he liked to take pen tops and paper clips and staples and random household things, and those would be the penguins. He had a vivid imagination. And his brain was always working. Even at night, he would dream vivid dreams of other worlds, and he would have that dream where you could fly. I don't know if you've ever had that dream, but it's quite an exhilarating feeling, the feeling of flight. And he loved it. And he loved the way his brain just took him to different places. Well, one day, Jarvis went to school, and he had kind of a tough day at school. He wasn't super interested in what they were teaching. It was Common Core math, and he didn't think that it made much sense. And he thought for sure there must be a simpler, possibly older way of doing math that would make more sense to him. But alas, it's what they taught. And he started to kind of drift off, and he fell asleep. And as he was falling asleep, he did that kind of that snort thing where you jolt back in your chair. And everyone turned around and everyone laughed at him. And he had some drool, and it was a whole thing. And he wasn't feeling too great about himself. And when he got home, he went in his room, as he always does, And he walked in, and he noticed his closet door was closed. It's normally closed. That wasn't unusual. But what was unusual was there was steam or fog, he wasn't quite sure, seeping out from beneath the door, and it glowed. There was a faint orange glow of light coming from beneath the door. Well, being a curious kid, Jarvis decided to open the door.
And Jarvis was surprised to find that the steam was actually coming from a humidifier that had a neon light that he had left on the night before. Oh, right, I forgot. I had a stuffy nose. So he decided to unplug the humidifier when the outlet came a little loose. That's a little odd. First of all, I don't remember there being an outlet in my closet. And also, this house was built by very fine craftsmen who would never have had an outlet loose. But he decided to get a screwdriver kit that he had found, one of those screwdriver kits that has 40 little screw bits that you can put in that he liked to play with. And he experimented around to try to get the outlet fixed. But every time that he screwed it in, it got a little looser and a little looser until he pulled it off. And he peeked behind there. And sure enough, there was an even brighter glow, the same color that had been coming from the humidifier. Well, that's strange. There was a little bit of the drywall coming off of the closet around the outlet, and so he pulled at that, and he pulled some more, and he pulled some more. And he thought his closet led to his mom and dad's room, but when he walked through the open hole that he had found, he realized he was actually in his family room. Well, that's strange. That's not where I thought I would be, but this is my family room. There's the papier-mâché penguins that I had built before, and that Lego Harry Potter train set that I had built earlier, and the Common Core math that I was working on that I fell asleep on, and so there's that little drool stain in the corner, and some Pirate's Booty dust on it from when I got bored and had a snack. So this must be my house. I must have just been wrong about where my closet led out. But then, all of a sudden, when he took a step into the living room, all of his little creatures came to life. The penguins started waddling around, and the Harry Potter train started to choo-choo, and the conductor said all aboard, and the Common Core math problems started jumping up and dancing off of the page like they were in some sort of strange animated cartoon about how a bill becomes a law or something. And he thought, what? This is not the house that I remember. Well, even stranger still was these penguins. Now, these penguins were made of papier-mâché, mind you, but they could walk and they could talk and waddle, and the men sat on the eggs like they tend to do, and they mated for life like penguins tend to do. And they said, Jarvis, come with us. We have an idea. We would like to bring you to a land that we like to call Classic Math Land. And so he followed these waddling penguins out the door, down the street, and into a warehouse that was full of chalkboards and paper and abacuses and rulers and protractors, even though he didn't know what a protractor was, and compasses, even though he often got those confused with protractors. And the penguins, whose names were just Penguin 1, Penguin 2, Penguin 3, it was a very linear society, said, Jarvis, it's time for you to learn how to do classic math.
And so these penguins started writing basic math problems on the board. And it was addition, subtraction, division, multiplication. And they would write on the board, and very quickly they would have an answer. And Jarvis was taken aback. He said, but don't you have to write a bunch of other numbers and things? I mean, shouldn't there be a lot more chalk on this chalkboard? Because I don't know, I don't really pay attention in Common Core, but the teacher always just has tons of numbers. I don't know how you only wrote a few things and now you already have the answer. And they said, well, because Jarvis, Common Core math is just overly complicated. And all you really need to do is just write the equation and then solve the problem. And you don't need to go into great detail. Sometimes the old way is the simpler way. And sometimes the old simpler way is just the better way. Does that make sense? He said, yeah, I guess. Do you know why my teacher makes me do it this complicated way? And Penguin 1 looked to Penguin 2, who said nothing because Penguin 2 never said anything. And then Penguin 3 finally chimed in and said, there are some things in the universe, Jarvis, that are far beyond your understanding. And there are great mysteries to unlock in the universe. And one of the greatest mysteries is why Common Core math is still taught. He said, okay, but that doesn't really help me in my class. And Penguin 3 said, we're not here to fix your problems, Jarvis. We're here to just kind of hang out and help you kind of process what you're going through in real life. I mean, this is all obviously not actually happening. And he said, what do you mean? And before they could answer, the school bell rang.
And Jarvis jolted awake and realized it was just a dream. That whole thing was just a dream. And his teacher shouted, Jarvis! Jarvis! And he looked up. She said, don't you have any understanding of the Common Core math principles that we were teaching? Are you finished with the test? And Jarvis looked down at his test and wiped away the drool spot. But much to his surprise, all of the questions had been answered. And Jarvis thought, maybe I was writing down some numbers in my sleep? Is that possible? Is there such a thing as sleep mathing? I know about sleepwalking. Maybe I was walking around and writing math answers. And the teacher came over and peeked at Jarvis's paper and gasped with surprise because every single response was correct. Only Jarvis hadn't used Common Core math. He had used classic math. But the teacher said, I have to accept these answers. Jarvis, you get an A. Jarvis was as delighted as could be. He was a C student who'd finally gotten an A. And he walked home that night, ready to show his parents his A test, when he noticed the papier-mâché penguins had little smudges of pencil on their hands and little smirks on their faces. Who had written those math answers after all? The end.
Alex Berger, are you ready for one more story?
I'm always ready.
Fantastic. The word is pen.
Once upon a time, there was a little boy named Jacob. And Jacob loved to write stories. He would write stories about action heroes, dogs. He would write stories about Pokemon and baseball players. He would write stories about basically anything that ever happened to him. And his favorite story was a story called Super Puppy, which was about a dog superhero that could do just about anything he wanted. Well, one day, Jacob set about to write a story, and he always used to write in pencil because Jacob knew that it was okay to make mistakes, and that was what erasers were for. In fact, his dad used to talk to him about a show he watched in his earlier days called Square One, that had a sketch about making mistakes, and it would say that the sketch was called Oops, and Oops was brought to you by erasers. Don't make a mistake without one. References for the nerdy parents listening to the podcast. Back to the story. So Jacob had written every story ever in pencil, but he decided one day, I'm going to write a story in pen. Why not? I'm pretty confident in these super puppy stories, and I have a good feeling that this one is going to be pretty much mistake-free. And you know what? I'm going to use the fancy paper. That paper that's like 15 cents a sheet that Dad said to only use when I'm printing out invitations or various other pronouncements of value. So Jacob got together the fancy paper, and he stapled it together with the fancy stapler, the one that had solid gold staples. That was really just for special occasions when we were stapling things that were extra valuable. And the pen was the fountain pen that Dad said never to use because it belonged to his great-great-grandfather who had written the Declaration of Independence with it. So Jacob got out the fountain pen and the fancy paper and the fancy staples and realized this had better be the greatest story ever written. I mean, this is the first writing that's being done with this pen since the Declaration of Independence, which somehow was written by my great-great-grandfather, despite the fact that the math doesn't totally add up on that. Maybe it was a Zachary Tyler situation. Again, just a reference for the nerdy parents. You have to be really nerdy to understand what that's about. So he started to write the story. And there was something about the magic of this pen. Brilliance started to flow through him. Super Puppy was doing the most magical adventures and having the funniest quips. And the conflict was extra conflicted, and the side characters were extra charactery, and the scenery was extra scenery-y. But there was something off. There was something off. So Jacob went into his dad's office. Behind a glass case was a pen that was even more valuable than the fountain pen. Because this is the pen. You know that saying, the pen is mightier than the sword? This is the pen that was based on. The original pen that was mightier than the original sword. And this was like, it was behind a glass case, there was an alarm, there were lasers, there was an insurance policy. There was insurance policy on the insurance policy for this pen. That's how valuable this pen was. But Jacob said, I don't think I can really finish the story without the pen is mightier than the sword pen. Now, how was he going to get into the glass case? Well, of course, he also had the sword that the pen is mightier than the sword statement was based on. So he used the sword to get into the case. He got the pen out. The code was just the pen is mightier than the sword, which seems like a pretty silly alarm code for that. But, you know, Dad wasn't so creative. And he took this pen out and he realized he didn't know where to end the story. He had the most amazing beginning. I mean, the greatest beginning in the history of beginnings. If you go back all the way to the beginning of time, it was that level of beginning. It was like Big Bang Theory good beginning. And he had an inciting incident that was, I mean, it was inciting. It was exciting and inciting. And he had a middle that was the middliest middle you've ever middled. I mean, this was the middle to end all middles. But he couldn't think of an ending. And that's when a dog jumped through the window with an S on its chest and grabbed both pens and the sword and the paper and the fancy stapler away from Jacob and ran out the window. And Jacob thought, oh no, this is the disaster of all disasters. This is worse than losing a crystal egg off of the mantle while having a party that I didn't tell my parents about and having to go to Joey Pantaleonis to get it back. This is a disaster. But then he remembered that he was a big fan of Dog the Bounty Hunter. Now, he'd never seen an episode of Dog the Bounty Hunter, but he was just a big fan of the concept, and he figured Dog the Bounty Hunter must be a bounty hunter for dogs. So he hired Dog the Bounty Hunter. And sure enough, even though that's not what Dog the Bounty Hunter was, it turns out he's just a bounty hunter who goes by the name Dog. He also happened to be an amateur dog bounty hunter. It was a budding career just in case the regular bounty hunting didn't work out. And Dog the Bounty Hunter, who hunted dogs in an amateur way, had a way of getting back this dog that had stolen the Declaration of Independence pen and the pen is mightier than the sword pen and the pen is mightier than the sword, which is to announce to the world that the pen that God had created the universe with was available. And he thought this was going to be a lure. Now, this didn't totally make sense because I'm not sure that God created the universe with a pen, but the dog that stole these pens was a dog. He didn't know that. So Dog the Bounty Hunter made an announcement. It was one of those announcements that a beep comes on the television and they say, this is a test of the emergency broadcast system. And then Dog the Bounty Hunter made an announcement about this pen. And sure enough, the dog, with the two pens and the sword in its mouth, came running. And running and running and running until it was looking like it was going to get as close as possible. And then the dog sniffed and realized that the pen that it was after was just one of those simple Bic pens that you get in a box at CVS. But before he had figured out that it was all a hoax, clamp, a trap came down on him. It was Dog the Bounty Hunter who had bested him with his famous Bic pen God created the universe trick that he's used many a time to great success. Jacob was able to get the pen back that was used to write the Declaration of Independence and get the pen back that was used to base the story, the pen is mightier than the sword, and get the sword back, put them all back in their cases, and found a crystal egg to put on the mantle just for good measure. And he knew that he had the ending to his story. The end.